The desert lay still beneath the late afternoon sun, the kind of stillness that made a man feel watched, as if the land itself were holding its breath. Calder Hayes rode slow across the open flats, his hat pulled low, sweat rolling down from beneath the brim and tracing lines through the dust on his face. Heat shimmered in curtains off the cracked earth, bending the horizon into wavering ghosts. He'd spent the morning checking for strayed cattle and expected nothing more than another long, lonesome ride home. But then he saw something ahead, something swaying in a way no tree limb should sway. At first he thought it was a carcass, maybe a half-starved coyote hung up in the branches of a twisted juniper. But the closer he drew, the more wrong the shape became. It was too long, too still, too heavy with meaning. Then he saw the feet, bare, bound at the ankles with braided rawhide, the soles bruised and bloodied. A dry wind hissed across the flats, lifting her long black hair where it brushed the dust. Flies circled lazily around her ribs, and each slow drop of blood that slid from her waistline struck the earth with a soft tap, like a quiet clock counting down the last seconds of a life. Calder exhaled shakily, the sound swallowed by the open silence. An Apache woman, hung upside down to die. Her arms had been tied behind her so brutally that her shoulders strained at the sockets. Her ribs were lashed with whip marks, old and new, some scabbed, others split open from the heat. Rope burns cut deep into her skin. Her lips were cracked, her breath shallow and uneven. Whoever did this hadn't simply meant to kill her, they'd meant to erase her. Calder slid down from his horse, boots sinking slightly into the powder-dry soil. The desert around him felt wrong, too quiet, too emptied of life. Even the wind seemed to pause as he approached her. When he reached the tree, she suddenly opened her eyes. Dark eyes, fierce eyes, warrior eyes. They locked onto his with a clarity that startled him. Pain lived there, but not surrender. Calder stopped inches from her, throat tight. "Easy," he whispered, though he knew she didn't need comfort from him. It felt more like a prayer slipped from his own cracked conscience. The silence thickened until it felt alive. Calder's thoughts churned. Apache settler tensions were a hair from exploding. A white rancher found cutting down a tortured Apache woman, every side would have a reason to hang him. He'd lived his life by keeping clear of other people's wars, at least since the last one burned him hollow. Yet he scanned the ground out of instinct, his eyes catching the deep impressions of horses, boot tracks, drag marks where she'd been hauled, signs of at least half a dozen men, and on the bark beside her, burned in with iron, a crude brand, a wolf's jaw. He knew that mark. Traffickers. Vicious ones. He swallowed hard. Someone had done this recently, someone cruel, someone close. His hand shook only once before he reached for the knot binding her ankles. "Hold on." His voice felt rough in his throat. "You're getting out of this." He pulled his knife. One slice through the rawhide. The rope snapped, and she fell like a dropped stone. Calder lunged forward, catching her body before it hit the dirt, her weight sending dust spiraling up around them like smoke rising from a dying fire. Up close, she smelled of heat, blood, and stubborn life. Her breath fluttered weakly against his collarbone. He could feel the tremor of her heartbeat, thin, but still fighting. Her lips moved. Calder bent down, tightening his grip. "What is it?" A single rasped word escaped, barely shaped, heavy with all the fear she refused to show in her eyes. "Trackers." Her body went limp as she passed out in his arms. Calder lifted his head sharply, scanning the ridges. The wind shifted, carrying with it the faint, unmistakable beat of distant hooves. Shadows flickered along the high ground, figures, watching, waiting. The kind of men who returned to finish what they started. Calder gathered her against his chest, set her across his saddle, swung up behind her, and turned his horse toward home.
The desert wind pushed at his back, whispering its warning. They were not alone. The fire cracked softly in the corner of the small cabin, its glow painting the rough-cut walls in shades of warm gold and restless shadow. Calder Hayes moved quietly inside that shifting light, his boots leaving faint prints in the dust on the plank floor. The woman lay on his spare cot wrapped in a wool blanket that did little to hide the bruises across her ribs or the raw burns at her wrists. Even unconscious, she looked like someone braced for the next blow. When he brought a cup of water to her lips, she stirred. Her eyes opened sharp and wary, and she jerked her head away from him. Her pride stood between them like a blade. "It's just water," Calder murmured, voice low, careful, as if loud sound might shatter something fragile inside the room. He lifted the cup again. She flinched a second time, her breath catching from the ache of torn muscles, but she still refused to drink. Calder set the cup aside, forcing patience he didn't truly feel. He couldn't blame her. He'd seen men, hardened soldiers, turn into wild creatures after less cruelty than she'd endured. Outside, the wind pressed against the cabin boards, whispering through the cracks, stirring the ashes in the fire pit. A coyote cried somewhere up in the hills, a long, lonely note that sounded too close to a warning. Calder dipped a cloth into warm water and wrung it out with steady fingers. His hands didn't tremble, though his heart did. He'd made enough mistakes in his life, he would not add her to that ledger. When he touched the cloth to her skin, she went rigid. "Easy," he said. "I ain't here to harm you." She didn't soften, not even a flicker. Her eyes watched him like she expected a knife at any moment. Calder worked in silence, dabbing blood, cleaning dried sweat, binding wounds. Guilt gnawed at him with every pass of the bandage. He remembered another desert years ago, guns, dust, a bad decision that still howled in his nightmares. Innocent people had died because he hesitated at the wrong moment. Today, he hadn't hesitated, but the memory still sat heavy as a stone in his chest. As the night deepened, the world outside the cabin grew louder. Coyotes cried again, closer. Then something else, something softer, deeper. A drumbeat. One solitary thump rolling across the desert floor, carried by the wind, it echoed through the cabin walls, then faded into nothing.
Calder froze. The woman's eyes shifted toward the window, recognition sharp as a blade in her gaze. "You hear that too?" he said quietly. She didn't answer. After a long stretch of silence thick enough to taste, she finally spoke, her voice rough, as though unused for days. "My name is Soraya." Calder bowed his head slightly. Calder Hayes. She considered him, her expression unreadable. "I am the daughter of a warrior. They took me near the water cliffs, men who sell flesh to whoever pays most. Traffickers." Calder's jaw tightened. "I escaped," she continued, breath unsteady. "They hunted me, punished me when they caught me again." Her gaze drifted to her wrists, the raw wounds there. "I did not bow. So they tried to break me another way." The fire popped sharply, sending sparks up the chimney. Calder felt something shift between them. Not trust, not yet, but the first thin bridge toward it. He pushed a tin plate of cornbread toward her. She hesitated, eyeing him as though eating might somehow bind him to her. Only when her stomach betrayed her, with a small pained growl, did she accept it, taking a piece with a trembling hand. She ate sparingly, pride never loosening its grip. He gave her space after that, sitting near the fire while she rested. Their silence wasn't empty, it was thick, watching, measuring. Now and then the wind brushed the door. The dying fire painted her features with dancing shadows, and Calder found himself wondering how a person endured such cruelty and still held herself like royalty carved from iron. Just before dawn, he stepped outside to feed the horse and froze. Fresh tracks circled the barn, hoof prints, boot prints. Someone had come in the night, close, watching. Calder's breath tightened. The dust still held their shape, recent, dangerously recent. When he returned inside, the fire had burned low. Soraya was no longer lying on the cot. She was sitting up, back straight despite her injuries, her jaw clenched in quiet resolve. In her hand, she held a broken piece of the wooden bed frame, sharpened into a stake. Her eyes met his. She was ready for whoever came next. So was he. Midday heat lay over the land like a smothering hand, pressing the breath from anything foolish enough to move beneath it. Calder stood outside the cabin, splitting fence rails, when he noticed the dust, thin at first, then curling into tall, twisting pillars, rising off the ridge like smoke from some distant fire. His heartbeat shifted, a subtle, heavy thing deep in his chest. Men were coming, too many, moving with intent. He wiped sweat from his brow and stepped into the open, eyes narrowing against the glare. 6 riders, maybe more hidden in their dust cloud, armed, riding hard, then slowing as they spotted his ranch. Calder recognized the tall man at the front by the cruel straightness of his posture and the lazy, proud slouch of the hand resting near his revolver. Boone Craven, a trafficker whose name carried the stink of violence wherever it traveled. Calder's jaw tightened. Boone had the kind of smile you only ever saw in nightmares. Thin, amused, sharpened by cruelty. And now that smile grew as he reined in his horse at Calder's gate, dust swirling like a halo of filth around him. "Well now," Boone drawled, tipping his hat with pretended politeness. "Surprised seeing you out here, Hayes." Calder stepped forward, boots grinding into dry earth. "What do you want, Boone?" "Ain't here for trouble," Boone lied with a grin that said the opposite. "Just looking for something that wandered off. A thieving Apache girl. Mean little thing. Ran through here not long ago." Calder kept his face stone still. "Haven't seen anyone." "Interesting. Got tracks near your barn, say otherwise." Calder's jaw tightened. "Those were my tracks." Boone leaned forward in his saddle. "Mind if we check?" "I do." Silence thickened between them. The heat, the dust, the creaking leather, everything seemed to hold its breath. Boone's men shifted in their saddles, hands brushing rifle stocks. Calder felt the weight of his own rifle across his back, though he didn't reach for it. Not yet. Inside the cabin, Soraya froze where she'd been standing by the window. Boone's voice, his cadence, his venom, pulled old memories forward like claws dragging through her mind. Her fists trembled, nails cutting into her palms. She saw the stakes, the ropes, the jeering faces. She saw herself upside down beneath the sun, blood dripping into dust. Her breath thinned, but she forced herself silent, listening, fighting the storm inside her. Outside, Boone's smile dropped. "Hayes," he said softly, "poison wrapped in honey. I'll make this plain. Hand her over and you walk away clean as fresh snow. Lie to me?" His hand brushed his revolver. "We burn your little ranch to ashes, and the buzzards pick what's left of you." Calder felt the world tilt, not from fear, but from the familiar ache of a choice he'd made once before. He'd stayed out of someone else's fight years ago, and people had died because of it. The guilt lived in him like rust, eating through every quiet day. Now here stood Boone Craven, offering him the easy path again. Cowardice, dressed up as survival. Calder swallowed. His mouth felt dry, throat tight. His eyes shifted briefly toward the cabin door. He didn't know if Soraya heard him, but he knew what she deserved to hear. "You ain't searching a damn thing." Boone's smile returned, slow and savoring. "Then you won't mind when we come back with a few more friends."
He yanked his reins, turning his horse sharply as his men followed, dust rising behind them like storm clouds. Calder watched until they were specks on the horizon. Only then did he feel the tremor run through his hand. When he stepped back into the cabin, Saria stood in the center of the room, straight-backed despite her wounds, eyes blazing with anger and fear wrapped so tightly together they were indistinguishable. "You should have given me up," she said, voice trembling with fury she fought to contain. Calder met her gaze. "No," he said softly, more to himself than her. "Not this time." A long silence grew between them, not hostile, but heavy, like something sacred taking shape. Outside, the wind kicked up dust along the ground, whispering warning. Boone would return. Men like him always did. Together, without another word, they began preparing for the storm rolling toward them across the dry desert floor. Night fell hard and heavy, the kind that swallowed sound and left only the hollow throb of a man's pulse in his ears. Calder and Saria rode fast beneath that iron darkness, the moon a thin blade overhead. They cut across the flats and vanished into the stone throat of Skull Canyon, its towering red walls looming like the ribs of some ancient beast, long dead but not yet forgotten. Wind whispered through its narrow corridors, carrying with it the faint scent of sage and old spirits. Saria murmured something in Apache, a quiet sound meant for ancestors, not for him. Behind them, far off at first, then closer, hooves. Boone Craven had returned with a swarm of riders. Their torches glowed like angry stars scattered across the desert floor. Calder reined in his horse beside a jagged ridge overlooking a choke point so narrow only 2 riders could pass abreast. He and Saria slid down, leading their mount into the shadows. Calder's breath fogged faintly as the desert temperature dropped. Every rock, every twisted ledge seemed carved for ambush. Desperation sharpened his senses. Fear sharpened hers. "They follow," Saria whispered, crouching beside him, her hand pressed to the earth. He nodded. "We hold them here." The torches drew closer, bobbing like fireflies caught in a storm. Crude laughter echoed between the canyon walls, stretched thin by stone. Boone's voice rose above it all. "They're close, boys. Canyon's got only one way out. We'll smoke 'em like desert rats." Calder steadied his rifle along the ridge. His heartbeat slowed, the world narrowing to the faint glow of the approaching column. Saria disappeared into the rocks above, moving with a grace no injury could steal from her. Calder caught one glimpse of her silhouette, lean, fierce, reborn under moonlight. Boone's men spilled into the canyon mouth. Calder fired the first shot. Thunder cracked through the canyon, the sound slamming against stone and ricocheting down twisting passageways. A rider fell, torch flying into dust. Horses screamed, rearing back. Panic rippled across the formation as men scrambled for cover that didn't exist. From above, Saria struck. A stone tumbled down, knocking a rider from his saddle. Another man jerked backward, an arrow buried in his thigh, her aim unshaken despite the scars lining her arms. She moved across the canyon walls like a spirit called home, the shadows embracing her as if the ancestors themselves had carved the stone for her steps. The traffickers cursed, firing blindly into the cliffs. Their torches flickered under sudden gusts of canyon wind, casting wild shapes across red rock. The air filled with dust, fire, echo, and chaos. Calder climbed down from his perch, firing as he moved from boulder to boulder. A bullet grazed his shoulder, spinning him into the dirt. Pain flared hot, metallic, but he pushed himself up. Blood soaked his shirt. He tasted earth and copper. Boone's men surged deeper into the canyon, splitting into 2 groups to flank them. Saria saw them coming. She shouted a warning in Apache, sharp and urgent. Calder dove behind a stone outcrop as gunfire exploded. The canyon choked with smoke. Men shouted, horses thrashed, torchlight spun wildly. Then Boone appeared. He stepped through the chaos with a cold smile, his revolver gleaming under the moon. Calder backed against a sheer wall of stone, his rifle empty. Boone cocked the hammer. Saria dropped from the rocks above, like a falling star.
She slammed into Boone, knocking him sideways, the gunshot screaming into the stone behind Calder. Boone roared, swinging wildly. Soraya fought with the fury of every rope burn carved into her skin. They tumbled across the dirt, a heartbeat of limbs and dust and rage. Boone managed to draw a hidden knife, his arm lifting for the killing strike. Calder lunged, taking the blade through the shoulder before it found her. A cry tore from Soraya as Calder staggered, blood spreading across his shirt. Boone twisted, but she struck first, fast, final, full of thunder. Boone fell, the knife clattering from his hand, his cruelty finally silenced. The remaining traffickers, seeing their leader fallen and the canyon alive with unseen enemies, fled into the darkness, their torches vanishing like dying stars. Silence slowly settled. Dust drifted in the moonlight. Calder leaned against the stone wall, breath trembling, while Soraya knelt before him, her hands touching his wound with a gentleness carved from gratitude and something deeper. The canyon exhaled, as if it had been holding its breath for years, waiting for this moment. Dawn crept slowly into Skull Canyon, not with fire and fury, but with a quiet gold that softened every jagged stone. The red walls, stained with the dust and echoes of the night's violence, seemed to breathe again in the first light. Calder sat near a small fire he'd coaxed to life, its embers still glowing in the cold morning air. Blood soaked his torn shirt, but the bleeding had slowed. Pain moved through him in slow tides, yet he welcomed it, proof he'd lived through the storm. Soraya knelt at his side, her face calm beneath the rising sun. For the first time since he'd found her hanging in that cursed desert, her touch carried no tension, no hidden recoil. Her hands, strong and steady, pressed cloth against his wound, and her eyes held a warmth he had not expected to ever see directed toward him. "You fought with the heart of a man who walks straight," she said quietly. "Not many do." Calder managed a faint smile. "Could have fooled me last night." A rare softness crossed her features, something fragile, brief but real. She tightened the bandage with practiced skill, then leaned back on her heels, the firelight dancing across her bruises. She looked like someone reforged in the crucible of the canyon. "I will return to my people, not as prey, not as a prisoner, as who I was born to be." The word struck him harder than any blade. He nodded, though a dull ache bloomed at the base of his ribs, one wound no cloth could bind. She had earned her freedom tenfold. He felt no right to ask her to stay. Soraya slipped a small bone-carved pendant from around her wrist. The delicate shape of it, a hawk diving, wings spread wide, seemed alive in her palm. She held it out to him. "This belongs to my family, passed from mother to daughter for generations." Her voice softened, barely above the desert wind. "You carry it now, not as a claim, as a mark of the choice you made. Courage over fear." Calder hesitated, humbled. Then he took it gently, closing his fingers around the carved bone. Warm from her touch, it felt like a heartbeat. Soraya rose, her shadow stretching long across the canyon floor. She chose a horse from those left behind, dark-coated, restless, strong. With one fluid motion, she mounted, sitting tall despite her wounds. The sunlight caught her profile, turning it into something almost carved from the canyon itself. She looked back at him one last time. A look without words, gratitude, respect, and something unspoken that the desert wind carried away before he could name it. Then she turned her horse toward the open world beyond the canyon's mouth and rode into the newborn light, her silhouette framed in gold until she became part of the horizon.
Calder watched until the last faint echo of hooves faded. Only then did he unclench his hand and look at the pendant resting in his palm. The desert wind moved past him, warm, soft, almost approving, and in that quiet he understood. Some heroes wear no badge, swear no oath, and carve no name into stone, but the West remembers those who chose what was right, even when no one was watching.